Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Are the government's multiple and abrupt transfers of senior civil servants justified? Or are they creating uncertainty, and do they represent a quest for a yes man? That's the discussion in part 2. But first, on a day when the sensex tumbled nearly 600 points after yesterday's disappointing GDP figures, how do India's industrialists view the state of the economy, and more importantly, the fact that key promised reforms are stalled and no one knows when they will go ahead? 2 months ago, Finance Minister Jaitley called land, labour and taxation reforms absolutely necessary. Today, one is stalled, a second reversed, and the third not even talked about. In a moment, 3 of India's most important industrialists join me to share how they view the situation. They are the chairman of Bajaj Auto, Rahul Bajaj, the chairman and senior managing director of DCM Shriram, Ajay Shriram, and the chairman of Maruti Suzuki, R.C. Bhargav. Mr. Bhargav, let's start with yesterday's GDP figures. Compared to January-March, growth in April-June has fallen by 0.5%, falling therefore from 7.5 to 7%. Does that mean that Mr. Jaitley's budget target of 8.1 to 8.5% now looks difficult to meet, and that can't be cheering news for the country?
No, I think that 8.1 to 8.5 is certainly a difficult figure to achieve. And I think part of the reason is the global slowdown. All our exports are slowing down. That's going to have an impact on the GDP. And a consequence of that is domestic demand is also not as strong as one thought it would be. So I don't think 8.5 at least is within the realms of possibility.
In fact, even the 8 figure, which is the lower end of his threshold,
also very, very difficult.
Because having got just 7 in the first quarter, right. You have to do phenomenally well to make up.
To 8, sure.
So therefore, we can say that if the 8 to 8.5 can't be met in terms of growth, then this will also have an impact on his assessment of tax, and it could have an impact on the money he has to spend. It will have a knock-on effect.
But part of it gets set off by the lower oil prices and things. So it's not necessarily that he'll have a larger deficit.
But taxes could be affected.
Could be.
Mr. Bajaj, the slowing down of growth in the first quarter has happened in a year when the monsoon has come in with a 12% deficit, which means that rural demand is unlikely to grow. And that in turn means that pressure on the GDP will continue, maybe even pressure on the GDP could get worse instead of easing off.
That's correct. We have had some bad luck, misfortune in terms of the monsoons again. We had a bad monsoon last year, we had some extra rains earlier on, and now we have a bad monsoon again. And the latest forecast we know is 89% of the 5-year average. That's 11% below the normal, which is pretty bad. The good points are, as Kedo was mentioning, the lower commodity prices and the lower oil prices, which helps in fiscal deficit, helps in current account deficits, helps in input costs for industries, etc., etc. So, but I would tend to go along. He didn't mention a figure, but with Kedo, that's Mr. Bhargav, that I'm not an economist, but during the fiscal 2015-16, if I had to bet on a figure of GDP growth, I would bet on 7.5 plus minus rather than 8. I would not vote for 8. 7 is not out of the realm of possibility. It all depends on what this government can do, and to some extent, what the opposition will allow it to do in the upper chamber of parliaments.
Absolutely. I'll come to what this government can do in a moment's time. But first, Ajay Shriram, on top of the problems with our monsoon, on top of the fact that our growth is slowing down rather than accelerating, there is also the international situation. China is slowing. Europe is hardly encouraging. We could still see a US interest rate hike later this month. And our exports have been steadily declining for 8 consecutive months. Doesn't this mean that our GDP is not going to get much encouragement from the international environment?
I think, Karan, to a degree you are right. Because of the world economy, there is an impact on the Indian economy too. There's no doubt on that. But I think the other side is we've had some devaluation, which is going to help exports. I think that will be a bit of a fillip. And the US economy is doing well. So I think that's one area where we have some sunshine coming about. But I think the other side of it also is that inflation is under control in India. And that's also a positive sign in terms of our own economy. So yes, because of the world economy, because of the monsoons and commodity prices being down, there is an impact on the exports and certain products are under pressure. But I think it's really a matter of, okay, this quarter, but I think down the line things will pick up.
Mr. Bhargav, against this background, and I've deliberately sketched it out because that's the result of yesterday's figures, that's the background against which we have to judge what happens in terms of reforms. How do you first of all view the government's decision to actually reverse the land acquisition amendments it had come up with? It's 3 times pushed them through to ordinance. Now that ordinance is lapsed, and what it means is we're right back to the original 2013 Act without any significant changes whatsoever. How do you view that as an industrialist?
See, as far as we are personally concerned, it doesn't make any difference. We've got the land. But overall, I think it does convey the message that the ability of the government today to implement legislation at the central level is very much dependent on the opposition parties. And unfortunately for us, there is no political consensus at all on the measures which are required and which I think everybody should agree upon are necessary for getting the economy moving, jobs created, wealth created, so that more distribution can take place. Why there can't be a political consensus on this is hard to understand, because everybody wants these things to happen, that poverty should go down, people should live better. It doesn't happen.
But you know, as recently as June, when he went to America, Mr. Jaitley repeatedly and very strongly said,
sure,
if need be, there would be a joint session. At that point, the government seemed confident it would happen. Now, even that confidence has eased and leaked out of the system because there's no joint session happening on land acquisition. And who knows when Congress will permit land acquisition amendments.
Sure.
Do you get the feeling that, as far as the centre is concerned, the states are another matter, land acquisition is not going to happen during this government?
I don't think we can rule it out over the next 3.5 years or 4 years that we've got of this government, because I think one of the factors which they have taken into consideration is the Bihar elections, and they may just have a joint session after that.
Mr. Bajaj, in January this year, that's just about 7 months ago, this is what Mr. Jaitley said of the 2013 land acquisition law. He said, it's a highly complicated process of acquisition which renders it difficult or almost impossible to acquire land. And he added, it completely ignores the developmental needs of society and mandates that India won't grow. But yesterday, when we've effectively gone back to that very law, this is what Mr. Jaitley said. He said, land ordinance lapsing is not a setback, it's a step forward. Now, does his comment reassure industrialists, or do you think he's simply contradicting himself?
Listen, Mr. Jaitley is the finance minister of this country, which means he's also a very senior politician. He's talking politics. The first statement was a positive statement, you said 7 months ago or 6 months ago in January, and most of us, if not all of us in industry, agree with that. We don't want to be unfair to the farmers. Some kind of consent mechanism, as far as I'm concerned, has to be there. Well, the social impact analysis is a matter of debate. But unlike the GST, and maybe we'll come to that in a moment in some other laws, this is a law which entire opposition disagrees with. And I believe some of the allies like Shiv Sena and SAD also don't fully support it. So here I think, whether it's Mr. Jaitley or the Prime Minister himself or the BJP party or in fact RSS also, I think, or their agency have question marks. So there I think they went a bit too far. However good it may be for the country, if somebody wants to take my land, Karan, which I've lived on for 4 generations, or my ancestors have lived without my permission, just because I get some money, I may not like to give it away.
Can I interrupt? Can I interrupt? You're saying something very important, Mr. Bajaj. You're saying that as far as land acquisition amendments go, You personally think the government went too far, it was too ambitious. It should have moved more cautiously, it should have moved more politically carefully. Is that right? It was too ambitious.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I give an example, contrasting example of GST, where I would blame, in totality, this is not a, you just can't say 100% right or 100% wrong, but I would blame the opposition, and opposition are on board by and large in many of them. But Congress,
okay,
yes, the 2 or 3 amendments they are suggesting, 1% should not be there, at least it should not become 4%, 18% should be put into the act. I personally agree with that. I think industry agrees with that. But the states did not want that, and I think this is being political on the part of Congress for opposing it for the sake of opposing it.
Let me stick for a moment, Ajay Sriram, with land acquisition. I'll come back to GST in a moment's time. At the moment, the only credible hope that land acquisition amendments will happen in the foreseeable future is if the states push them through. Now, 2 states have, Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. But I'm asking you, as a former chairman of CI, is relying on the states to tackle land acquisition amendments sufficient to meet the needs of industry? Or are you concerned that BJP states may do it, but Congress won't, and therefore at best all we will have is a very patchy land acquisition scenario?
You know, to my mind, having the states taking the decision is better, because they have a better pulse on what is the mood of the state, what the people want, what are the actual issues which need to be addressed in each state. I think going at the state level is very desirable. And let's take 2 examples which have actually worked well. Let's take the case of Andhra Pradesh, where Mr. Chandrababu Naidu has moved to acquire land on a very different platform compared to what the Land Acquisition Act says. And he's got almost 35,000 hectares of land. The second is Uttar Pradesh, where they are making a 3,000 kilometer highway, and they have acquired land over a period of time, which has worked well.
What about?
I think at the end of the day, ultimately, Karan, no, at the end of the day, you know, India, the way I look at it, is 29 mini Indias within one large India.
But the
29 states and 7 union territories.
Can I interrupt? If you go by the states,
to take decisions.
If you go by the states, the BJP states and their allies in the NDA may well push through land acquisition amendments. Congress is not going to. Congress-ruled states will stick by 2013. Does it worry you? You'll have a very patchwork arrangement of land acquisition amendments. Some will do it, some won't.
Well, I'll just put it this way. From what I understand, in the Niti Aayog meeting, when this topic came off of revisiting the Land Acquisition Act, virtually all states were on board that we should make it more practical.
Congress states weren't even present.
So I've got a feeling with comparative...
Congress states weren't even present. I'm interrupting you. They weren't even present at the Niti Aayog meeting. They boycotted it. That's why I'm going back to my point.
Okay, but we've had discussions with various chief ministers. I appreciate.
Okay, let's move.
I appreciate, but I think this comparative federalism which is there.
I think of its patchwork, because it's only the competition between the states which will enable the voters to say which one they prefer.
Exactly.
And ultimately the voter has to say whether they want industries to come up easily or not.
So this concept of competitive federalism could work in such a way that the reluctant states are pushed by the successful states that do it.
I believe that's the only way India will progress.
Let's come to GST, because that is the other second stalled reform. Now, it's supposed to add 1.5% to GDP growth. How do you as a leading businessman view the fact that A, GST is stalled, and B, chances are it won't be passed in time to roll out on the 1st of April 2016, so we've probably lost a year as well.
It's certainly very disappointing that GST will not come or may not come on the 1st of April 16. But it's not the end of the world. We have survived without GST all these years. I think equally important, if not more important, is what has been talked about, which is end the way the tax regime functions, which leads to endless and immense amounts of litigation, harassment and cost. I think if Mr. Jaitley can get that part sorted out, as he said he's trying to get it sorted out, and there's a more positive approach towards tax collection, I think we'll have certainly got over the shock of not having a GST immediately.
You know, the BJP coined the word tax terrorism. Not only did Mr. Jaitley fail to reverse what I call the Vodafone amendment, and he's had 2 budgets where he could have done it, but in between, he also introduced the MAT problem, which now is being sorted out, and I think they've given assurances, in fact, it won't happen because of the Justice Shah Committee recommendations. But there, you get the feeling that rather than being sensible about handling tax, they're either reluctant to correct problems the last government left behind, or they're creating fresh problems of their own and then having to sort those out. You don't have a clear handling or a happy handling of tax.
Karan, the problem is today the tax people don't have the confidence to take the kind of decisions which are needed. The laws, the way we interpret the laws, the way the vigilance authorities act, makes everybody play safe, and that leads to what we call tax terrorism.
And the government isn't taking a clear line through it.
We haven't done anything about that so far.
Let's come, Mr. Bajaj, to the third critical reform that everyone was waiting and hoping for, and which certainly many industrialists believe is essential, and that is labour. Now, in a recent article, the editor of the Business Standard, A.K. Bhattacharya, has pointed out that all the labour reforms mooted by this government are either stuck in committees within the Labour Ministry itself, or they are stuck in committees in Parliament. Secondly, he says that if government can't push land, it's very unlikely that the government will be able to push labour reform. So do you think there's any likelihood of meaningful labour reform in the next 2-3 years?
I don't know about the next 2-3 years, Karan, but I see a problem because other things being equal, major labour reforms, not the kind which was good, but which was done by Vasundhara Raje in Rajasthan for companies or factories employing up to 300 people. Better than nothing, and there are a large number of those companies in the country. They export a lot as well. But proper labour reform for any company who wants to employ people should be flexible, and they should be able to adjust the labour force depending on the demand for their products. Now that to come, I put it equal to, relatively speaking, to the land position rather than the GST position. So my first part answer is yes, it will be much more difficult than GST. I'm still optimistic of GST. It will be passed. Question is effective 1st April 2016, as you said, or maybe 6 months. It could be in between the year or 1 year later. For that, they might bring a joint session, or they'll get most opposition people on the board, or maybe even Congress will come on board gradually. But labor is not GST. Here, not only you lose the Raj Sabha to the opposition, the unions will come on the streets. They already declared for something else, a strike on some day, 1st October.
2nd September, BJP, tomorrow.
Okay, tomorrow. Even the BJP unions, the BMS, would be very much against this kind of a law. So again, it's required. It's like the land acquisition bill required, but the country does not yet appear to be, unfortunately, ready for it.
Therefore, Ajay Sriram, let me quote to you what Mr. Jaitley said in June when he went to America. These are his exact words: land, labour and taxation. These are the 3 main areas where reforms are absolutely necessary. Those are his words, not mine. It seems on all 3 fronts, the government has problems and it may not be able to deliver. Do you get the feeling that politics has derailed the government's economic agenda?
Well, I'll put it this way: we are a vibrant democracy. There is no 2 ways on that. And even though, let's take an issue like GST, we appreciate it's been on the agenda for 5-6 years now, but somehow it has come into the limelight, become a major topic of discussion, a major reform for the economy only in the last year and a half or so. So I think once it comes to the surface, it gets its own momentum. On the labor front, again, I mean, these are sensitive issues. One can't expect change to happen overnight. And for labor to really be effective, it is an employer and employee relationship which makes all the difference. There are many companies today also which are running successfully without any problems. So I think major changes of this type in a democracy do take time, but as of today, it is not really a very big hindrance in any way in terms of growth of the economy. I mean, companies are coming up, people are employed, There are companies of the past who are there who are running well.
Let me stop you there. I'm going to stop you there. That's an
upsetting
interesting view, but it's a controversial view because I saw a nod on Mr. Bhargav's head as he was speaking that suggests that he may not agree. Ajay Sriram says that these hindrances, as he calls them, are not really affecting growth. They're not putting off investors. They're not therefore a problem. There are many others who say that actually if we don't get these meaningful reforms, land, labor, taxation, then the opportunity that China slowing down offers India is an opportunity we will not able to grab. And if we don't grab it, it will be gone, it won't come back again. Who do you agree with? Ajay Sriram, who's very optimistic, or these critics?
I believe, Karan, that unless India becomes far more competitive in its manufacturing, which means lower cost, better quality, more reliable production. And there are lots of factors which influence the competitiveness of manufacturing in India. It's just not GST or a labor reform by itself. Labor reform, one should be clear, what is the purpose of the labor reform? How are we going to do it? If we continue with a labor policy which creates management and labor to be adversaries, it's never going to help productivity.
But you're saying to me that you need reform of a variety of types across a variety of subjects if India is going to grow and become the manufacturing hub we want to be.
Absolutely.
So therefore you're saying that the Ajay Sriram attitude, that these are not problems, you are surviving quite happily, it doesn't matter, you don't agree with it?
I don't agree with that because I think we have a lot to do, otherwise our industrial growth won't have languished at 15 to 16% of GDP for decades.
Does it also therefore follow that whatever theoretical opportunity the slowing down of China gives us, we will be unable to take up that opportunity if we don't reform?
Unless we become much more competitive, and opportunity doesn't make any difference.
So this is a now moment. If we don't do it now, we've missed the boat.
Yes, and there are many things which can be done without central legislation which can make us competitive.
But even that isn't happening.
Many of them are happening.
Okay.
Some of them are happening, it's not that.
Let me put it like this, Mr. Bajaj. Industrialists had great hope that Mr. Modi, with his enormous commitment to reform, which he exhibited right through his election campaign, and then with the 282-seat majority he got, would be decisively different from the UPA government he replaced. As you view Mr. Modi's performance over the last 14 months, is this government decisively different to the past one, or has it failed to live up to that expectation?
I don't want to praise this government or criticize the earlier one, but it's clearly different. Come on. Especially the last 3 years of the previous government, you had scams, you had paralysis, you had bureaucrats not taking any decisions. Again, I said this is not 0 or 100, Karan Thapar. Even now, I keep hearing that at the lower level corruption is there, but not at the higher level compared to the past, compared to Colgate, compared to 2G. Even now I hear that some of the bureaucrats are afraid, as Kero said in a different context, Vigilance Commission, CBI, etc., etc. So there are problems. But he has brought in foreign equity in defense, in foreign affairs, increased their foreign equity limit in insurance. The mood has changed. Okay, maybe the change of mood was 90% or 80% in May and June 2014. It may be 60 or 70% now, and that again, the BJP may not agree with that, but that's what I'm saying. A little bit of the sheen is less of the thing. The fact remains, many things have been done by them, but yes, you see, it's not only the upper house, it's also political capital.
I take your point, Mr. Bajaj. I'm going to stop you. Forgive me interrupting you, but Mr. Jaitley has just announced at a press conference, and it's germane to the subject we're discussing. He's announced that necessary amendments in the Income Tax Act will be required to exempt MAT on FIIs. That's one of the issues we were discussing a moment ago, and I pointed out that this is a problem they'd created themselves, and now they had to sort it out. Here's Mr. Jaitley saying that, in fact, an amendment to the Income Tax Act will be brought about fairly soon to tackle that problem of MAT on FIIs. And in fact, as he's pointed out, that amendment will be... Sorry, I beg your pardon, Mr. Bajaj?
And the electricity board and the banks are two areas where a lot can be done. And it can help the economy a great deal.
All right, I'm afraid we're running right out of time at that point, but it's a very important announcement made just now while we were on air by Arun Jaitley. The problem that many believe was created by this government itself sometime around April, May this year, that frightened a lot of international investors because of the way they were retrospectively imposing MAT. That problem will now be tackled by amending the Income Tax Act. The Finance Minister has formally said so at a press conference this evening, and he's also indicated, I believe, that that amendment will be brought shortly. Obviously, it will have to happen when Parliament convenes, but that is a great assurance to FIIs that a problem that had put them off has been recognized by the government and it will be tackled, and I presume this is in pursuit of the recommendations the government has got from the Justice AP Shah Committee. We'll end there. That's a positive note on which to end. That's one sensible problem the government is tackling, but there are, remember, many others that still remain to be tackled. Land acquisition that's been reversed, GST that's stalled, labour that's not even being talked about, and then beyond that, all the other essentials that are needed to ensure that we grow at the 8.1 to 8.5% the budget has targeted, rather than just the 7% we achieved in the last quarter. My thanks to my guests for joining me. Yesterday's sudden dismissal of the Home Secretary is the second time this has happened since the Modi government took over. In that 14-month period, the Foreign Secretary has been dismissed, a Finance Secretary transferred to 2 separate ministries, a Revenue Secretary transferred, and a whole spate of other senior transfers implemented. Is this understandable when a new government takes over, or is it unsettling and therefore a cause of concern? With me are 2 senior former civil servants, former Cabinet Secretary Surendra Singh and former Home Secretary G.K. Pillai. Mr. Surendra Singh, in just 14 months, the Modi government has dismissed 2 Home Secretaries, a Foreign Secretary, transferred a Finance Secretary first to Tourism and then to the Minority Affairs Ministry, and also a Revenue Secretary, not to mention a whole list of other transfers at the Secretary, Additional Secretary and Joint Secretary levels. Taken all together, is this understandable when a new government comes to power, or is it unsettling and therefore a cause of potential concern?
Well, it's certainly unsettling and demoralizing for the officers, and not only demoralizing, it affects their performance also, because in any senior position, it does take a minimum of about 3 months to come to grips with what the requirements of that job are. And then if an officer does not stay there for a decent length of time, at least 2 or 3 years, so it affects both the performance of the officer, and of course it demoralizes the officer, and it keeps him from expressing his views frankly, as is expected of a senior civil servant.
Now, Mr. Pillai,
certainly in the last 14 months there have been a number of transfers, but I won't say that it's a new thing. Unfortunately, even at the Government of India level, it's been happening for the last maybe 15 years or so.
Sure.
Far too many transfers at senior level are taking place, which wasn't always the case before.
Mr. Pillai, you've been Home Secretary. 2 successive Home Secretaries have been dismissed before their terms ended, and on both occasions it was allegedly because they had differences with the minister, or as some papers have claimed, particularly in the fresh instance, because they were bureaucratic in their approach, whatever that may mean. What impact would this have, A, on the Home Ministry and its functioning, and B, on the civil servants and their morale, particularly the civil servants who work in the Home Ministry?
Yeah, I think it is very, very disturbing, particularly for such a sensitive post as the Union Home Secretary. It's possibly the most crucial post in the Government of India. And I think it betrays in one sense a little bit of lack of immaturity, both at the level of the Union Home Minister and the Prime Minister's office, because you selected this new Home Secretary, and the selection process for the Union Home Secretary is quite extensive, comprehensive. You've looked at all his records, you've got security clearances, you've seen his, everything is done. And then you appoint somebody, and then in 7 months, if you find that he's not up to the mark, I think it is a sad reflection on the performance of the way in which the Prime Minister's office has selected the Union Home Secretary.
So in other words, this is as much an indictment of the politicians running the government as it is purportedly of the poor Home Secretary who's been dismissed. This reverberates badly on the politicians.
Yes, I think to an extent it is, because I think we are, so far he's resigned for so-called personal reasons, but he's taken a job at CMD of the ITPO, so it's not that he could not continue in government service for whatever personal or health reasons. Some rumors have said about his rigidity and so on, but I think more than that, I think it is a lack of understanding of the role of the Home Minister and the role of the Home Secretary. I think there are very clear need to, for the Prime Minister and the Home Minister to sit down and discuss what is the role of the Minister and what is the role of the Secretary. I think it is very, very critical, because at least in this case, I know very well that there have been certain instances where I think the Home Secretary has been rightly put his foot down, saying that this cannot be done because it would undermine the very authority of the Union Home Secretary.
You know, Mr. Surendra Singh, one of your successors as Cabinet Secretary, Mr. K.M. Chandrasekhar, speaking to the Economic Times this morning, has commented on the fact that on the day he was due to retire, a former Finance Secretary was made Home Secretary with a 2-year tenure, thus overlooking other senior officers who presumably should have been in line for that job. And this is what Mr. Chandrasekhar said. People in the eligibility zone for senior jobs wouldn't now be confident that meritocracy is at work. This decision on someone's last day in office looks very contrived. This demoralizes good officers and seems to suggest that officers for key posts are being picked arbitrarily. Would you agree with Mr. Chandrasekhar?
Yes, I would agree with all that he said. In fact, I've read what he said in the Economic Times myself this morning. But I would say about, you see, some years ago, 2 posts, that's the Home Secretary and the Defense Secretary, and a number of other posts, were given fixed tenure of 2 years, because these 2 posts, out of all the secretaries, and later on, of course, the Foreign Secretary was also added. So these 3 were considered posts where continuity at that level was considered essential. Of course, there is nothing to prevent government from appointing a Home Secretary who, at the time when he or she is appointed, 2 years of service left, technically appoint somebody who has just a few days left, as in the case of the Foreign Secretary, or is going to retire that same day. Technically it's not wrong, but then even if the previous Home Secretary was not performing as was expected of him, I'm sure there would have been other officers who had a reasonable tenure ahead of them. One of them could have been appointed as the Home Secretary. So it certainly does not leave a good taste in the mouth.
Mr. Pillai, let's take the case of Arvind Mayaram, who was Finance Secretary. He was first transferred from the Finance Ministry and sent to Tourism. Then, before he could even take charge of Tourism, he was transferred again and sent this time to Minority Affairs. Now, is this sort of very cavalier way of transferring and then changing your mind and transferring again an acceptable way of treating a senior civil servant? Or does it suggest dismissiveness and perhaps even a certain element of contempt?
Yeah, I think it shows a very, very casual way in which this postings of senior officers are done. And I think whoever is responsible for that has to take responsibility and accountability for such decisions. And I have no doubt whatsoever, I think that even in this case of the present Union Home Secretary, I think the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Secretary are needed in one sense to put their foot down and say that this is something which is not acceptable.
That's a very important thing you're saying. You're suggesting that perhaps the Cabinet Secretary and the Principal Secretary failed to fulfill an important function at a critical time and allowed their judgment to be, in a sense, railroaded. Yeah,
see, these are the senior officers who are expected to provide the little bit of wisdom and the balance when decisions are sort of taken in an arbitrary fashion, and they need to review, call for a review and say that, look, have a look at this decision and ask for a reconsideration. I think that is what is expected of officers of the level of Cabinet Secretary and the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Let me put an opposite sort of question to you, Mr. Surendra Singh. On the other hand, what should the Prime Minister or the Home Minister or the Finance Minister do if they find that the Home Secretary or the Finance Secretary is someone with whom they have key differences and cannot work with? Now, I know the Finance Secretary doesn't have a 2-year tenure, but the Home Secretary does, the Defense Secretary does. What happens in their case if their minister can't get on with them, but the gentleman concerned has a 2-year tenure? What then?
You see, hypothetically one can make that point, but it seldom happens in government that a minister and a secretary find it so difficult to get along together that one of them has to leave. In fact, one of the requirements of one of the job requirements of a secretary should be to give his minister frank and fearless advice to the best of his knowledge and ability, even if it happens to differ from the minister's preferred option. After all, it's always open to the minister to overrule the secretary, in which case what the minister decides becomes binding. I read somewhere, I'm not very sure if it's true or not, that Sardar Patel, when he was Home Minister, and his Home Secretary used to differ with him on a number of issues, somebody suggested to Sardar Patel that maybe he should get another Home Secretary. He said, well, the day my Home Secretary begins to agree with me on everything, I think that would be the time to change my Home Secretary. So this kind of a, I would not say confrontation, but at least taking a view contra to what the minister would like is expected of the secretary, is not just permissible, but that's what a secretary should do if he sincerely feels that way.
Picking up on that,
therefore,
sorry,
to transfer.
Carry on, sir.
No, okay, I finished.
Picking up on that point, Mr. Pillai.
No, so I was saying.
Yes, go ahead. Go. No, I don't think I'm going to say any more. Mr. Pillai, picking up on that point that we heard from Mr. Surendra Singh, when secretaries are shifted or shunted around on the grounds that the minister cannot get on with them, does that suggest the minister is looking for the best talent and this person doesn't have it? Or does it suggest the minister is looking for a yes man and doesn't like the fact that this person is contradicting his opinion or offering advice that the minister thinks is different to his standpoint? Which of the two do you get the impression is the case?
I think generally, the impression I would get is that they are looking for yes men, because I think it is the duty of the officer, and that is the one thing left in the Indian administrative service, is to give your free and frank opinion. And as Mr. Surendra Singh said, the minister is always competent to overrule. And so long as it is a legal overruling and it's not any decision which is illegal, the Home Secretary is bound by that. And I don't think there is any instance or which is being cited that the Home Secretary did not obey any lawful directions of the Home Minister. So I think we need to be very careful, because the Union Home Secretary's post is such a sensitive and critical post that to give the impression to the rest of the organization in the Home Ministry that this is a post that you can play with and discard at the whims and fancies is, I think, a very, very bad omen for that institution itself and for the Home Ministry.
Very quickly, Mr. Surendra Singh, because time is running out. When Cabinet Secretaries, Home Secretaries and Foreign Secretaries are supposed to have fixed 2-year tenures, but within the short space of 14 months, 3 with such tenures are dismissed before their tenure is over, does it not make a complete mockery of the claim these people have a fixed tenure? Because it seems when the government doesn't want to observe that, it just dismisses them without any care or concern.
Well, it certainly does. I mean, the very idea or the very concept of fixed tenure is that after all, you become a secretary when you're pretty much at the fag end of your career. If by then the system has not been able to discover that you're incompetent, then it doesn't say much for the system. So one takes it for granted that the selection process is robust enough to make sure that a good person is selected for these posts, and therefore a fixed tenure should be treated as a fixed tenure. That's the very purpose of it.
One quick last question.
It's wrong to change somebody in mid-term. It might happen that somebody might blot his copybook very badly, but that would be very rare.
One last quick question, Mr. Pillen, if you can answer quickly, because time is our enemy. Does Mr. Maharishi, the new Home Secretary, who had to take over in rather controversial circumstances, and many will say he's taken over because he's considered a favorite, otherwise he wouldn't have been taking over on the day he was supposed to actually retire, does he have a sort of daunting challenge now to establish and prove himself in the Home Ministry?
Yeah, he will have. I wish him the best in the interest of the country. But it's going to take time for him. I don't think that he has worked in any of the security or the key ministries in the government of India earlier in either home or defense, and therefore he's going to take his time, 3 to 6 months, to pick up the job. And I wish him the best.
All right, gentlemen, my thanks to both of you for joining us, for sharing with us your opinion about what's happened and enlightening us in the process. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye.